Okay, let's unpack this. A figure whose very existence seems to, well, straddle the line between history and something more profound. Billions have been touched by his story, yet the earthly details of Jesus of Nazareth remain, in so many ways, an echo, leaving us with more questions than certainties.
It really is enigmatic, isn't it? How a life so influential could also be so shrouded. As our sources hint, while the historical reality of Jesus is generally accepted, the specifics, the when, the where, the how, they often just dissolve into this fascinating mist of conjecture and interpretation.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about, navigating some of those enduring enigmas surrounding the historical Jesus. We've gathered material from a YouTube exploration looking into 5 key historical puzzles.
Yeah, and it really highlights that delicate balance between what we sort of know or think we know and what remains genuinely uncertain.
Right. So our quest today, to explore these claims, consider the different perspectives, and really try to grasp the mysterious aspects that still surround this, pivotal figure. We're not necessarily looking for definitive answers where the evidence is just silent.
No, it's more about the intrigue of the questions themselves, I think.
Definitely. These aren't just academic points, are they? They touch the core of belief, history, how we see this figure who, as one source puts it poetically, split history in two.
A powerful way to frame it.
Right. So let's start with the first enigma, the very beginning, the day of his birth. The world pretty much marks Christmas on December 25th. It's woven into everything.
But when you dig a bit deeper, historically speaking, that date gets really murky. Our source material suggests most historians actually question December 25th, and they even challenge the traditional AD/BC dating system relative to his actual birth.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About where even our biggest traditions come from. So if December 25th is unlikely, and even our calendar system is questioned here, when might he have been born?
Well, scholars should link it to King Herod the Great. His death around 4 BC is a key marker. So the general consensus puts Jesus' birth somewhere between 6 and 4 BC.
Okay, 6 to 4 BC.
Yeah, and that fits reasonably well with the Gospel of Luke saying Jesus was around 30 years old when he started his ministry.
Got it. So the year's in a rough window. But the day, the month, you mentioned shepherds in the fields, that classic image, it doesn't exactly scream middle of winter, does it?
No, it really doesn't. That's a great point. Luke's gospel mentioning shepherds out with their flocks at night. That's less likely in the cold Palestinian winter. So it opens up the possibility of, a warmer season birth. Maybe summer, maybe autumn.
And there's even a specific theory about September, isn't there? How does that work?
Yeah, it's quite intricate reasoning. It involves tracking back from the Annunciation to Mary, which is traditionally placed 6 months before John the Baptist's birth. If you estimate John's conception around, say, June, then Jesus' birth, following the typical 9 months after the Annunciation, could potentially land in September.
Wow, it's like historical detective work. So where did December 25th come from then? Why that specific date?
That really gets into early church history and its interaction with the Roman world. Our source points to Pope Julius I in the 4th century, making it official, and the leading theory. It was deliberately chosen to align with the Roman festival of Saturnalia.
Saturnalia, the winter solstice festival.
Exactly, a time of major celebration. So choosing December 25th might have been a strategic move, a way to sort of overlay Christian meaning onto an existing pagan festival, maybe make the transition easier for converts.
Finding common ground almost, weaving the new faith into the old culture.
Precisely. Could well have been. Later, Pope Liberius formally set it up as its own distinct Catholic feast day. So while December 25th holds immense meaning, its historical roots might be more about cultural adaptation than pinpointing the actual night.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
A reminder that narratives evolve. Okay, let's shift to another key point, the death of Herod the Great. Why is his death date so important for Jesus' timeline?
Because Herod's death is like a historical anchor. Both Matthew's and Luke's Gospels place Jesus' birth during Herod's reign. So if we can fix Herod's death date, it helps bracket the possible birth year for Jesus.
Right, makes sense. And what's the generally accepted time frame for when Herod died?
The widely held view, thanks largely to the work of Emil Schurer back in the 1890s, puts Herod's death in 4 BC.
4 BC. And what's the evidence backing that up? Why are scholars pretty confident about that?
There are a few strong indicators. Our source notes that Herod's sons, Archelaus and Philip the Tetrarch, they dated the start of their own reigns from 4 BC. Plus, Philip reigned for 37 years and died in 34 AD.
Okay.
So if you count back 37 years from 34 AD, you land right back at 4 BC for his accession, implying Herod died just before that.
Seems pretty solid. But like many things we're discussing, even this has faced some challenges, hasn't it? Something about older manuscripts.
That's right. Back in 1998, David Beyer argued for a later date, possibly after 1 BC. He based this on some older Latin translations of the historian Josephus, which seemed to suggest Philip died a couple of years later than usually thought.
Which would push Herod's death later, too.
Exactly. It would shift the whole timeline. But this view hasn't really gained wide acceptance.
Why not?
Well, scholars like Raymond Hockley critiqued Beyer's reliance on those Latin texts, suggesting they might be flawed translations and that the original Greek Josephus is more reliable. So the 4 BC date still stands as the stronger scholarly consensus.
Okay, so how do the Gospels fit with this 4 BC date? Matthew says Jesus was born in the days of King Herod. That sounds a bit vague.
It does leave some room. Matthew's story about the Magi visiting and then Herod ordering the killing of infants. Yeah. That could have happened when Jesus was up to 2 years old. So a birth in, say, 6 BC fits fine with Herod aiming in 4 BC.
Right. And Luke saying Jesus was around 30 when his ministry began.
Yeah. Around 30 isn't super precise. It could easily mean, say, 32. If you work backwards from the estimated dates of Jesus' ministry, a birth year like 6 or 5 BC still lines up pretty well with him being around 30-something when he started and Herod dying in 4 BC.
But there's also that tricky bit in Luke about the census under Quirinius. Josephus dates that census much later, around 6 AD, right? How do scholars deal with that apparent clash?
Ah, yes, the Quirinius census. That is a classic puzzle. Josephus definitely puts a major census by Quirinius in 6 AD, well after Herod died. But the argument often made is that major Roman censuses weren't necessarily one-off events. Some ancient writers mention other enrollments.
So Luke might be referring to an earlier census, one that did happen before Herod died.
That's the common reconciliation, yes. That Luke might be referencing an earlier, perhaps less documented census activity during Quirinius' time in the region, even if the big famous one was later. It's still debated, of course, but it's how many scholars harmonize the accounts.
So even something seemingly concrete like a death date has these layers.
Okay, let's dive into maybe the biggest mystery of all, the lost years. Almost 20 years between age 12 and 30. Just silence in the records. Where did he go?
It's a massive void, isn't it? Almost 2 decades unaccounted for. Our source calls it a biblical enigma, which feels right. And yeah, the question hangs there. What happened during that time?
And the theories are just wild sometimes. Travels to Britain, India, Persia, even incredibly North America.
Oh, absolutely. Folklore and legend have rushed in to fill that silence. But if we stick to the Bible itself, the last time we see young Jesus is in Nazareth, age 12. Then, poof, he reappears around age 30.
So setting aside the more exotic legends for a moment, what are the more plausible explanations for what he might have been doing?
Well, one straightforward idea mentioned in our source is that he probably worked as a carpenter, an artisan, a tekton in Greek, maybe in Nazareth, maybe in a nearby larger town like Sepphoris, just living a normal life.
That makes sense. Another thought is that maybe his father, Joseph, died when Jesus was around, say, 18. Perhaps Jesus then needed to travel for work, maybe leaving his mother Mary with relatives. It's plausible, but purely speculative.
And these stories about epic journeys. Britain with Joseph of Arimathea. Studying Buddhism in India. Do they have any historical grounding at all?
Not really, no. They're fascinating tales, and they've persisted for centuries, but there's no contemporary historical evidence to back them up. They belong more to the realm of legend and, well, later traditions.
What of the Vatican's secret archives? That rumor always pops up that there are hidden documents revealing everything.
Ah, yes, the Vatican Archives legend. It speaks to how much people want to know, doesn't it? The idea that there's hidden knowledge, maybe suppressed because it challenges dogma, it's compelling. But again, there's zero credible evidence it's true.
And just thinking practically, the distances involved in some of those travels, Britain, India, that's thousands and thousands of kilometers, on foot mostly.
Exactly. Our source points this out. It would have taken years of constant, dangerous travel. Even with Roman roads, it wasn't easy.
And North America, crossing the Atlantic back then.
That's just astronomically improbable. An epic voyage far beyond the likely capabilities of the time for someone in his position.
Though the Roman roads did exist, right? They weren't just for legions.
They did exist, yes. An extensive network, primarily for military use, but civilians could travel on them. Still, it wasn't like hopping on a bus. There were dangers, bandits, wild animals. So ultimately, the lost years remain just that, lost. A blank space history hasn't filled.
A truly enduring mystery. Okay, let's move from the silent years to something more personal. The question of whether Jesus was married. The traditional view, held for centuries, is a firm no.
That's correct. Within the canonical Gospels, there's absolutely no mention of a wife or children for Jesus. That's the basis for the traditional understanding.
But then popular culture got shaken up by Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, didn't it? Bringing the idea of Jesus marrying Mary Magdalene to a massive audience.
Oh, absolutely. That novel, though fiction, really ignited public interest and debate around the topic. And then something tangible emerged in 2012 that added fuel to the fire. This fragment known as the Gospel of Jesus' Wife.
Right. Tell us about that fragment. What did this little piece of papyrus actually say?
It was a tiny piece, dated roughly to the 4th century, written in Coptic, and it contained this bombshell phrase, Jesus said to them, my wife. It was revealed by Professor Karen King at Harvard Divinity School.
My wife. Wow. And what was Professor King's take on its significance?
Well, she was careful. She emphasized it didn't prove Jesus was married. But, she argued, it was strong evidence that some early Christians, maybe in the 2nd century, were discussing this very idea. They believed he might have been married.
So it suggested the debate itself was ancient.
Exactly. And she noted that the strong emphasis on Jesus' celibacy as a model only really became prominent more than a century after his death.
But there were questions about the fragment itself almost immediately, weren't there? Like, where did it come from?
Yes, that was a major issue. Its provenance, its history of ownership was unknown. The owner remained anonymous, and that lack of a clear origin story naturally made scholars cautious, raising red flags about potential forgery.
If it were genuine, though, what kind of impact could it have? It seems like it would touch on really fundamental things.
Oh, huge implications. As our source mentions, even with the authenticity questions, it reignited debates about Jesus' marriage, his relationship with Mary Magdalene, potential descendants, and that ripples into modern discussions about, say, women in ministry or the Catholic Church's stance on priestly celibacy.
And the Vatican's position on that hasn't changed.
No, the Vatican reiterated its stance on the celibacy based on the traditional understanding of Jesus as unmarried.
Initially, though, some experts did think the fragment looked authentic, right? Based on the material, the language.
Yes, that's true. Initial analysis by some independent scholars suggested the papyrus itself, the ink, the Coptic script, seemed consistent with the period. It wasn't immediately dismissed by everyone, and images and a translation were published in the Harvard Theological Review in 2013 for wider study.
Was more testing planned, like chemical analysis?
Yes. The plan was to conduct more rigorous scientific tests, like analyzing the ink composition to get a more definitive answer on its age and authenticity, which eventually did happen, leading to further debate, and many concluding it was likely a modern forgery. But at the time of its emergence,
it caused quite a stir.
Absolutely. King's nuanced point remained interesting. Even if a later creation, it might still reflect ancient traditions or beliefs held by some groups. But as Daryl Bach, another scholar, noted, even if authentic, it's likely a fragment representing a minority view, not something to overturn core theology. The debate around it was intense.
So another layer of mystery. Okay, for our final enigma, let's turn to an object, a very famous, very controversial object, the Shroud of Turin. What exactly is it?
The Shroud of Turin, or the Sabana Santa, is this long linen cloth that bears a faint yellowish image, like a photographic negative almost, of the front and back of a naked man, showing wounds consistent with crucifixion.
And it's been venerated for centuries as Jesus' actual burial cloth.
By many, yes. Its documented history surfaces in Lirey, France, around 1354. Though interestingly, it was quickly denounced as a fake, a painting, by the local bishop back in 1389.
So skepticism existed right from the start.
It seems so. But it gained veneration anyway. It was acquired by the House of Savoy in the 15th century, survived a fire in Chambéry in 1532, which some say complicates things, and it ended up in Turin, Italy in 1578, where it remains. The Catholic Church has officially owned it since 1983.
A long and traumatic history. But the big question, the one science tried to answer, is it genuinely from the 1st century? Is it Jesus' shroud?
And that's where science delivered a pretty major blow to its claim of authenticity. First, in the late 1970s, microanalyst Walter McCrone concluded the image was basically made of paint pigments, specifically red ochre.
Paint, not some miraculous image.
That was his finding, yes. Then came the big one, radiocarbon dating in 1988. 3 separate, highly respected labs analyzed samples.
And the results?
They all converged on a date range between 1260 and 1390 AD, with 95% confidence.
Wow. So medieval. not first century Palestine.
Exactly. That result strongly indicated it was created in the Middle Ages, making it impossible to be the actual burial shroud of the historical Jesus.
That sounds pretty conclusive. Is the debate over?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But no. Believers in the shroud's authenticity, sometimes called syndenologists, they push back. They argue the sample taken for dating might have been contaminated, perhaps from repairs done after that 1532 fire, or maybe by bacteria and fungi over the centuries, skewing the carbon date.
So they claim the science was flawed.
Essentially, yes, or at least that the sample wasn't representative of the original cloth. So, despite the C14 dating, the controversy absolutely continues in popular books, documentaries, and some academic corners.
And the Catholic Church, what's its official position now?
The Church has been quite careful. It hasn't officially declared the shroud authentic, nor has it definitively denied it. It allows it to be venerated as a powerful icon, a reminder of Christ's passion, but leaves the question of its historical authenticity open, essentially a matter for personal faith and ongoing scientific debate.
Another mystery that endures, woven right into the cloth itself.
Okay.
So, reflecting on all this, we've looked at 5 profound mysteries. The birth date, Herod's death date, those lost years, the marriage question, the shroud.
And the common thread is, well, uncertainty. Despite centuries of study, historical digging, scientific analysis, huge questions remain around key moments in the life of this incredibly influential figure.
It really does highlight the gaps, doesn't it? The limits of what history can definitively tell us about someone from so long ago, even someone so foundational to Western civilization. It invites a certain, maybe, humility about our knowledge.
Absolutely. These aren't just puzzles to be solved. They're invitations to think more deeply about how history is constructed, how faith interacts with evidence, and how meaning is found even amidst ambiguity.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about all these enduring mysteries, the gaps, the debates, the uncertainties, what aspects of the historical Jesus or the story of Jesus resonate most profoundly with you? And how does grappling with these very mysteries shape your own understanding, whether it's of faith, of history, or just of the enduring power of enigma itself?
It's something to ponder, isn't it? The questions might be just as important as any answers we could find. It encourages that ongoing exploration, like critical thinking about the sources, the interpretations, and the man at the center of it all.